Today we're diving into a really big question. How do informal networks and their unique approaches, often called invisible colleges, how do they profoundly influence the way we understand and pursue knowledge across, well, pretty much every field imaginable?
Yeah, and we'll trace this idea from, its 17th century roots right up to today, looking at critiques of academia and some frankly pretty wild theories about hidden intelligences, maybe even government efforts shaping our reality. And all this is grounded in the source material we've both looked at.
Right. So my perspective, broadly, is that these invisible colleges have historically played a constructive, often vital role. They foster genuine scientific progress, genuine inquiry, both back then and still today.
hmm And I'm coming at it a bit differently. While acknowledging that history, of course, I'll be arguing that certain powerful groups, maybe even some invisible colleges, engage in, well, deliberate manipulation, obfuscation, fundamentally altering our collective understanding, maybe even the fabric of what we perceive as real.
Okay, well, let's start there then. The original Invisible College, founded in 17th century England, was, I think, genuinely a revolutionary force. I mean, it emerged from this deep frustration with the stifling, dogmatic, authority-based learning of the time, right?
hmm
They consciously broke from traditions relying solely on figures like Aristotle or, the church. Its methodology wasn't about quoting the past. It championed empirical observation, experimental investigation as the absolute bedrock of truth. And crucially, they deliberately excluded divisive political or religious chat just to focus purely on scientific inquiry.
Okay.
In this collaborative spirit, where members transparently shared methods, assumptions, results, this transformed fields like alchemy into modern chemistry in, decades. This sort of clandestine network operating outside official channels was the direct precursor to the Royal Society. It formalized these principles under the motto, nullius in verba, take no one's word for it.
Right, the famous motto.
Exactly. And that motto, those practices, they established the very foundations of modern scientific practice. And even today, the sociological concept of an invisible college describes these vital informal networks, elite scientists rapidly exchanging ideas, ensuring swift diffusion of knowledge outside the slower, formal publishing routes. These structures, inspired by visions like Francis Bacon's Salomon's House, this idealized research place for human benefit, they clearly show how informal, collaborative pursuits have historically driven and continue to drive legitimate scientific advancement. They bypass bureaucracy, foster real intellectual freedom.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the story is so purely constructive. Yes, the historical Invisible College began as a rebellion against dogma, sure, but the very idea of an invisible network pursuing knowledge, well, it also carries a far more unsettling connotation, doesn't it? One deeply rooted in the manipulation of understanding, maybe reality itself.
How so?
Well, consider its historical connections to Rosicrucianism, for instance. This was a, quote, secret brotherhood from the 17th century, supposedly pursuing universal reformation through esoteric knowledge. They use symbols like the Rose Cross, which pops up even in modern mysteries like the Susquehanna mystery. These links, they kind of hint at a deeper, more covert guiding hand, almost like puppet masters or teachers subtly shaping our perception. It makes you wonder, right? Are these networks truly about open science or something else?
Okay.
And then you have Hermann Hesse in The Glass Bead Game, suggesting that serious contemplation of non-existent things can bring them a step closer to existence. Now, this isn't just philosophy. This perspective fundamentally alters how we interact with the unknown. It suggests that maybe all reality is an alternate reality. It's not just about fostering open science. It could be about actively shaping what we believe to be true, and in a very real sense, making it in our heads.
Ah, okay. I see the connection you're making to that focus.
Exactly. And look at modern academia, a direct legacy of these institutions. It's fallen prey to its own corruption, hasn't it? The relentless publisher-perish culture, the peer review process that's become, in some views, corrupt and dependent on authority. These things actively stifle groundbreaking, interdisciplinary work. This institutional decay, it creates fertile ground for powerful, often unseen forces to keep influencing and controlling how knowledge is pursued and understood. It becomes less about discovery, maybe more about control.
That's a compelling argument about the potential for hidden influence, I grant you. But let's dive into this idea of reality being in our heads. Well, yes, the power of belief and perception is undeniably significant. Framing this as a literal orchestration of reality, or the work of puppet masters, well, it risks undermining the very empirical inquiry that has led to verifiable knowledge, doesn't it? The original Invisible College's success was precisely in uncovering objective, verifiable truths through observation and experiment, not in manifesting them through belief alone.
That's an interesting distinction, but I think it misses the point about active manipulation. You mentioned the power of belief, right? But John C. Lilly, the neuroscientist, he directly states, what one believes to be true either is true or becomes true within certain limits. Now, that's not passive observation. That implies a profound, almost co-creative interaction with reality. And then Dr. Jacques Vallée, highly respected, known for his UFO theories, he argued the phenomenon is methodological, operating beyond our current physics and logic, acting as a control system designed to alter human belief systems and social structures. He pointed to absurd details in UFO encounters like, aliens supposedly repairing their craft in the middle of a road. He suggested these scenes were contrived only to present their witnesses with certain images, intentionally deceiving investigators.
To what end?
To shape belief. It implies the unknown performs for us, drawing from powerful archetypes to create a myth about itself, actively shaping our reality. And Lilly's encounters, through his pretty radical self-experimentation, encountering a supposed solid-state intelligence, or SSI, allegedly orchestrating human warfare to decrease biological life, or this Earth Coincidence Control Office, ECO, subtly nudging human evolution through synchronicities, these point to hidden intelligences actively programming or managing our human realities through what look like mere coincidences. The implication isn't just that reality is filtered by our minds, but that it can be actively manipulated, making it very much in our heads in a profound, maybe even programmatic way.
I see why you'd think that. And look, Vallée's insights into the methodological aspects are certainly valuable for understanding subjective experience, cultural interpretation, absolutely. But let's clarify here. Vallée's work, by linking modern sightings to historical folklore, also highlights psychological and cultural continuity. It suggests the human mind's interpretive lens shapes how we perceive and narrate these experiences over time.
But doesn't that perception become reality for the individual or even collectively?
Well, the notion of non-existent things coming closer to existence through belief, like Hesse noted, can be understood as the power of collective consciousness, yes, but also rigorous scientific investigation to legitimize previously dismissed phenomena. Think of something like dark matter, maybe. It's about uncovering what was previously unknown or dismissed, not necessarily literal reality warping by external intelligences. The shared methodology of the original Invisible College focused on verifiable, repeatable observations. Lilly's experiments, while fascinating accounts of subjective states, remain inherently challenging to replicate, to verify empirically in a way that establishes them as objective truths about external manipulating intelligences.
But if belief itself can bring things closer to existence, as Hesse suggested, and a phenomena like UAPs seem to intentionally deceive, as Vallée argues, isn't that a form of reality manipulation that goes beyond just interpretation? It's not only about what we believe, but what we are potentially made to believe. The very structure of our shared consensus reality could be actively shaped. How does pure empirical observation account for an intelligence that deliberately presents misleading evidence or orchestrates synchronicities?
I would argue that while perception is powerful, attributing it to literal external entities orchestrating our reality moves us away from testable hypotheses. We have to be careful not to conflate subjective experience or the influence of psychological archetypes with objective, external manipulation that stands up to empirical scrutiny. The strength of the scientific method is precisely its ability to differentiate between what's in our heads subjectively and what can be consistently observed and verified by multiple independent observers. Without that rigor, we lose the very ground upon which shared knowledge is built.
Okay, let's move to a related point then. How much of this is actively managed or even manipulated by human institutions, specifically governments? Because this ties into that idea of a curated reality too.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Well, I'd argue the government's actions show a clear pattern of stoking the lie, actively manipulating public understanding rather than just, managing sensitive information. It feels like more than just secrecy. It looks like a sustained effort to withhold and distort scientific findings about UAPs.
What makes you say stoking the lie specifically?
Consider the whistleblowers. Jeffrey Nusatelli, former Air Force police, confirmed Air Force police records of UAP incidents are systematically destroyed by the Air Force every 3 years on a schedule. That's active, deliberate erasure of evidence. George Knapp, the journalist, reveals the DIA withheld 95% of findings from ASAP, the biggest acknowledged UFO program ever funded by the U.S. government. This isn't just classifying stuff, it's wholesale suppression of scientific results.
Okay, the destruction of records and withholding data is definitely concerning.
Right? And furthermore, Dylan Borland, a former Air Force intelligence specialist, highlights how AARO, the government's UAP office, makes statements like no scientific evidence of extraterrestrials. Borland argues this is a misrepresentation of the full truth, very carefully worded to deny what they know without technically lying. They're defining scientific evidence so narrowly that confirming non-human origins becomes impossible, while allegedly government-backed advanced theoretical physics groups secretly study non-human technology and crash retrieval programs operate completely off the books. No congressional oversight. This suggests the government knows UAPs are real, involve non-human tech, but actively misleads about their nature and origin. And then there's talk of the aviary, these supposed insiders described as disinformation agents feeding fake stories to journalists, specifically to make them look like frauds and nut jobs so you can't trust anybody about anything. That demonstrates a systematic corruption of the public's ability to even discern truth. This isn't just protecting secrets, it strongly indicates the government actively stokes the lie about the nature of UAPs to control the narrative, protect national security, maybe even powerful economic interests tied to existing energy.
I'm not fully convinced by that line of reasoning, because while the secrecy is undeniable and destroying records is frankly unacceptable, the phrase stoking the lie implies a direct falsehood about non-existence, and I'm not sure all the evidence supports that specific claim. What the sources seem to reveal is a much more complex picture. Extreme classification, yes. Strategic ambiguity, certainly, but not necessarily outright denial that the phenomena themselves are real.
But the effect is denial, isn't it?
Well, when AARO states no scientific evidence of extraterrestrials, that can be interpreted as a precise, albeit frustratingly narrow, statement about the origin of the phenomena rather than their existence. The government might be managing a reality that it still struggles to fully comprehend or control itself. National security interests, as George Knapp himself suggests, could involve a technological race against other nations. Protecting that kind of information, even through obfuscation, might be deemed necessary by those in power to maintain a strategic edge. And while whistleblower retaliation is deplorable, absolutely, it points more to a deeply entrenched culture of secrecy and protecting classified programs than necessarily a universal lie about UAPs not existing at all. The invisible college of government researchers, hidden from us, is still pursuing knowledge, just shrouded in immense secrecy. It's not automatically a conspiracy to lie about reality itself.
But you're framing it as just managing information or security when the evidence points to something more insidious, I think. Deliberately destroying records, withholding 95% of findings from a major study using disinformation agents. That goes way beyond just secrecy for national security. It feels like a calculated effort to prevent a transparent scientific understanding from reaching the public, regardless of whether UAPs exist or not. It's about controlling the narrative, shaping what people are even allowed to think about that feels like a fundamental perversion of knowledge pursuit, even if you cloak it in national security.
I agree. Those actions are deeply problematic and they absolutely impede public understanding, but the motivation behind them is crucial. Protecting a perceived technological advantage or preventing societal panic, however misguided those decisions might be, is distinct from a deliberate blanket fabrication that UAPs simply don't exist. The Invisible College of Government Intelligence operates under a different set of priorities than open scientific inquiry. We can and should criticize its methods and lack of transparency, but it's not necessarily proof of a systematic lie about the physical existence of these phenomena. It might be more about a profound unwillingness to share what they know, or perhaps what they're still trying to figure out themselves.
Which brings us, I guess, to our final point. How does mainstream science itself, the institution supposedly dedicated to truth, respond to these kinds of challenges? Is it too compromised in some way?
Right, the critique of mainstream science.
Yeah, because the problem, as I see it, is that the very structures meant to pursue truth might be compromised from within. Mainstream science, despite its ideals, really struggles with that publish or perish culture. In that environment, visible metrics, publication counts, grant money seem to have overshadowed the invisible drivers of science, genuine curiosity and open dialogue.
That's a common critique. Yeah.
And the peer review process, ironically stemming from the Royal Society's principles, has become, according to some critics, corrupt and dependent on authority, actively stifling groundbreaking, interdisciplinary work that maybe challenges dominant paradigms. This institutional corruption, it creates fertile ground for manipulation, makes you wonder if figures like Rupert Sheldrake, with his critiques of reductionist science, might have a point about the limitations of our current scientific worldview.
So you're saying this creates a need for alternatives?
Exactly. When traditional science fails to engage rigorously with anomalous phenomena or just dismisses it out of hand, alternative invisible colleges become not just interesting but maybe necessary. Look at Jacques Vallée pushing ufologists to think more like detectives than forensic scientists, to understand an intelligence that might intentionally deceive its investigators. That's a whole different methodology. John C. Lilly, the maverick, exploring consciousness through radical self-experimentation, believing consciousness is primary, believing his leaky brain could get info from other intelligences. These methods, yeah, they're unorthodox, hard to replicate, but they are direct responses to a mainstream paradigm that seems unwilling or unable to address certain profound questions about reality and consciousness. It shows that when mainstream science is seen as corrupted or just too limited, new ways of knowing are forced to emerge outside those traditional structures, creating their own invisible colleges of inquiry.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it, well, a bit differently. While I absolutely acknowledge the valid and serious critiques of modern academic structures, the pressures of publish or perish are real. I see these as significant challenges within the system, not a wholesale fundamental corruption of mainstream science itself. The core commitment, empirical observation, rigorous methodology, peer validation, tracing back to the historical invisible college, that remains foundational to scientific progress.
But is it still functioning properly?
Well, even peer review, though imperfect and certainly needing reform, is fundamentally designed to ensure quality and validity. It acts as a crucial filter. And the invisible colleges of elite scientists still serve to rapidly diffuse and validate new ideas through rigorous, albeit informal, peer acceptance, often pushing boundaries faster than formal publications can. Now, figures like Vallée and Lilly, they offer intriguing alternative frameworks, yes, but the very strength of the scientific method is its self-correcting nature through falsifiable hypotheses and repeated experiments. Diverging into methodologies based solely on individual belief or radical self-experimentation or unverified subjective experience, while it might open new avenues of thought, it risks losing the critical guardrails that prevent unsubstantiated claims from becoming accepted knowledge.
So you're saying stick to the old ways?
No, I'm saying the solution is to address the systemic issues within academia, reform peer review, incentivize interdisciplinary work, create space for curiosity-driven research, rather than concluding mainstream science is beyond repair or that its foundational principles are flawed. We need more transparency and rigor, not an abandonment of evidence-based knowledge that the historical Invisible College pioneered. We need to fix the system, not throw it out.
But the very act of dismissing these unorthodox methodologies, even while acknowledging flaws in academia, kind of perpetuates the problem, doesn't it? If mainstream science is too rigid, too dependent on current paradigms to even consider the data from maverick researchers or anomalous phenomena seriously, isn't that a form of intellectual corruption itself? It's not about abandoning rigor. Maybe it's about expanding our definition of it. Maybe considering, as Sheldrake might suggest, that our current reductionist models are just insufficient for the full complexity of reality and consciousness. If science can't or won't address these big questions, what then becomes the arbiter of truth for what's really out there or in here?
I would argue that the rigor of the scientific method is precisely what protects us from mistaking anecdote or subjective experience for objective reality. Science is inherently conservative in accepting new paradigms. Yes, but that conservatism is often a strength, preventing premature conclusions based on insufficient evidence. What you might term dismissal is frequently just the demand for higher standards of evidence and replicability for extraordinary claims. The challenge, then, is for these alternative methodologies to find ways to meet those robust standards, not for science to lower them. The invisible colleges of genuine scientific inquiry have always been about elevating the standard of evidence, not diminishing it.
A fundamental difference in approach, then.
It seems so. Okay, so we've both explored the really profound ways these invisible colleges influence how we understand and pursue knowledge, from their revolutionary origins to their complex, sometimes troubling modern manifestations.
Yeah.
My perspective has emphasized the enduring value of empirical methods, collaboration, critical inquiry, tracing back to that original invisible college. I've argued these principles continue to foster genuine scientific progress, even with all the challenges within academic and government structures today.
And my counter-argument has really highlighted the pervasive, often covert influence of various invisible colleges, and maybe hidden intelligences, actively shaping human belief and perception. I've maintained that deliberate disinformation and institutional corruption fundamentally impede the transparent pursuit of truth, especially around anomalous phenomena, making us question how much of our reality is truly objective and how much might be, well, in our heads, or even actively curated by unseen forces.
Ultimately, the material really does suggest this constant tension, doesn't it, between visible and invisible forces in the quest for knowledge, a dynamic dance between transparency and concealment, established dogma and radical inquiry, the tangible and the methodological aspects of reality.
Absolutely. And the implications for our collective understanding are profound. It invites everyone listening to critically engage with the evidence, form their own conclusions about the unseen hands that might be guiding our understanding of the world.
Indeed. There is undoubtedly much more to explore in this material.